And welcome to the ILANZ Podcast. My name is Anitesh, Govind, and today we'll be talking to Benjamin Jacobs from Xero. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Thank you very much, Anitesh. Very excited to be here.
Thank you for taking out your time to be part of this podcast. It's an exciting podcast because we'll be talking about moving from UK to New Zealand and going from law firm to in-house role. So it'll be an exciting podcast. Ben, to get started with this podcast, let's talk about your background, your professional background, and how did you get into law and where do you work right now? So maybe if you start from where you start, how you got into law and then what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely. So as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm not a native Kiwi. I'm a Brit, Londoner, born and bred. And how I got into law is an interesting one. So my father was a lawyer. My mother was a lawyer. Both my grandfathers were lawyers. And until the age of about 16, I had absolutely zero interest in being a lawyer whatsoever, because that was the family thing. I didn't want to do that. But as I looked into it more and learned more and talked to my parents more, I really, realized that it was something that truly interested me, both as an intellectual pursuit and as an important part of our society and how it goes together and how it works.
Yes.
I've always enjoyed reading and being literary in words, which is, let's face it, a fairly important part of our role. So I went to university and read law. In the UK, it's normal to do that as a first undergraduate degree, and normally as a single subject as well. Less common to do sort of conjoint approach that people do in New Zealand.
I see.
So I did that for my 3 years. Absolutely loved it as a theoretical subject. Decided I wanted to go into practice and went through the usual sort of mill of applications, different kinds of firms, and in the end, took up an offer from Allen & Overy, which is one of the 5 big magic circle firms, as they're called in the UK, albeit it was a global firm as well, and did my training contract there. So I spent 2 years training there, went through different seats and specialties, which is the UK way of training up on the job, and decided to qualify into their corporate team specializing in mergers and acquisitions. And that's essentially what I've been doing for the last 20 years until very recently. So,
great.
Yeah.
And then from UK, you stayed at ILANZ for a long time, or did you move around over there?
Yeah, so I was at Allen & Overy for almost 12 years.
Yes.
So I really came up through the system there, learned a lot. It was a fantastic organization to be part of. And for that time, I was pretty much exclusively in the M&A legal team, but I did do a couple of secondments. My first one was to Ron & Son Alliance in their M&A legal team. And that was great fun, doing insurance work. And then just after the worst part of the GFC, I moved to the Royal Bank of Scotland on secondment for a year. Now, they were one of the worst hit banks in the UK, and they were selling off a lot of global businesses to bring capital, to retrench capital back to the UK to stabilize the bank. So they needed to expand their M&A legal team. And that was where I really fell in love with working in-house and spent a year there, thoroughly enjoying the experience. Came back to London. I've actually moved to Scotland for a year with a young family, and very quickly found a role at Barclays Bank. So moved in-house and spent 6 years there, running M&A globally around the world for them, which was fascinating, really exciting, very, very diverse in terms of the deals and the jurisdictions that we're working with, which I absolutely love.
Interesting. And so then after that, you have moved to New Zealand, as I understand, right? And what brings you? What brought you to New Zealand in the first place?
Good question. So, what brought me to New Zealand was love. I as a trainee at Allen & Overy, as I mentioned, you go around different departments doing a bit of different specialties.
Yes.
But the great thing about A&O being global was that they have overseas offices. And in your last 6 months, they give you the opportunity to go overseas. So I spent 6 months practicing law in Bangkok, which is a phenomenal place to be. But while I was there and really, really enjoying getting into Thai culture and society and life, I met and fell in love with a Kiwi.
I
And
see.
Liz, who was then on her OE, we decided there was something there. So she followed me back to the UK, and we lived there for 16 years together, getting married, having a couple of kids, and then finally decided that we needed to show the kids what sunshine looked like. So moved down to New Zealand about 6 years ago now.
Oh, cool. That's a good story. And then you came to New Zealand. And what happened then professionally?
Yeah, so I was working in house, obviously in London, and have been for 6 years. And my main focus was really on staying in house. But I did find it very difficult to find an in-house role moving from the UK, not being in New Zealand, not having the contacts and connections, and also not being New Zealand qualified, which obviously is pretty important to a lot of in-house roles here. So in the end, I was talking to some of the law firms, particularly to try and grow my world of connections. And Minter Ellison Rudd Watts said to me, actually, they had a space and they wanted someone senior to join their corporate team, and would I be prepared to come on board with them? And I think by that point, I'd realized that it was probably going to be the right way for me to come over to New Zealand. They're a great firm, really been growing their reputation, and I think have moved firmly into the top tier. So wonderful place to land, great home for me for the first 3 years, as it turned out. Allowed me to get to know the New Zealand market, to be introduced around, and also to requalify, which I suspect we'll come on and talk about a little bit more in due course. That was important to me as well. So that was my landing point. And then after 2.5, 3 years there, which I was very happy with, enjoying myself being back in private practice, I spotted the role at Xero to lead their M&A legal team.
I see.
And I confess that when I moved over to New Zealand, I thought that was probably it for being a specialist in-house M&A lawyer. I don't think that there is any other organization in New Zealand that has a specialist in-house M&A lawyer. And of course, Xero is one of the very few truly global companies headquartered in New Zealand. So the opportunity to join them and do that was super exciting. So I put my name in the hat and joined them in December 2019, about 3 months before the world changed and we went into lockdown.
Interesting. And around that time, you were elected as a committee member for ILANZ as well in 2020, I think 2020 March. And this when we both got actually elected.
That's right.
And then you became the treasurer right after that. But the world did change. But it's kind of going back to normal, I think, now.
We're getting there. We're definitely getting there.
So,
and it was super, super exciting to be able to join ILANZ. Whilst I was relatively new to the in-house community in New Zealand, obviously I'd spent considerable time in-house in the UK. And the UK doesn't have an equivalent of ILANZ. And so I was really quite inspired by the idea of ILANZ and the idea that there is an organization that is there to look out for the interests of New Zealand in-house lawyers. And it was great to have the opportunity to be able to, give something back and participate in that.
And being part of ILANZ is amazing. I think especially being part of the committee is kind of the coolest thing I've ever done, and has opened a lot of doors for me, actually. So you will probably say the same, everyone who wants to do fun things, join the committee, and when the election happens next. So
absolutely.
So let's talk about more about you going from UK to New Zealand. You had to requalify. It said that. Let's talk about that. What's the process for someone who's from UK who wants to qualify in New Zealand? How do you do that?
Absolutely. I think the first thing I'd say before we dive into the process is it's not actually obligatory to requalify. You can practice over here without necessarily requalifying.
I see.
There are certain reserved areas of law that you can't practice, and there are limitations on what you can call yourself. But it is possible to work, particularly within law firms, as an overseas qualified lawyer for a period of time. However, I always felt that it was important to me, given that I was moving here permanently, to understand New Zealand law, to be New Zealand qualified, and to have that tag. And it also opens up other areas of things that you can do. So I came in with the intention that was what I wanted to do, and got stuck in. So the first thing that you need to do to requalify is you need to have your overseas qualifications assessed.
Yes.
That involves putting together a not inconsiderable amount of paperwork for the New Zealand Council of Legal Education, who manage the process. They then assess that qualification, and that looks at everything from what degree you did, what subjects you studied, how you performed in them, what the content of those was, through to your post-qualification experience.
Yes.
And the result of that, which came back, which is fairly normal, especially for English qualified lawyers, is that I was deemed to have equivalence. Obviously, New Zealand law had very strong origins and roots in English law, so there's a lot of overlap in history, and we share precedent and things like that. Yeah. So what that then meant, having equivalence, was I needed to go through the lightest process to requalify. However, I would caution that it is not for the faint-hearted. I don't want to put people off. I think it's a great thing to do, but it is reasonably onerous. So I had to sit 6 exams in the key fundamental subjects, so contract, tort, trust, criminal, constitutional law, and land. They're each 90-minute papers. They are proper university-style exams, exam-style questions, proper essay answers. Yeah. And you have to do quite a lot of study for them. There is the documentation put out telling you what you need to know, which is essentially a list of cases, statutes, and some recommended textbooks. And then most people do it by self-study, although there are some organizations that will help you study for it. The exams are, half of them are closed book, half of them are open book, although as ever with open book, it's potentially a bit of a trap if you rely on needing to rustle through your notes to be able to answer everything.
I agree.
So there's a lot to know. I would say the one thing which is done very intelligently is they do focus for these exams on the things that are different. So if you take contract, for example, there's nothing in the paper about offer and acceptance and consideration. For example, that's all very much the same as English law, but our statutes are different. And some of the directions we've taken are different there, so it's focused on that. That doesn't help a huge amount with things like land law, where we've got a torrent-based system, and we've got Maryland, so you've got to learn about that from scratch. Tort, for example, obviously, ACC replaces large swathes of what I learned in the UK around negligence. Exactly. Yeah. So you need to learn that again. So there is quite a lot to get through. But you can take the exams over time. You don't have to take all 6 in one go. No one does that. I did them in 2 sets of 3, 6 months apart. To be honest, I'd caution against that. That was a lot of work. But what I did have, and this was great, was a very supportive law firm who wanted me to requalify, who helped a lot with the materials and the support and giving me time off to study as well, which was meaningful.
Oh, that was really nice of me just to do that, I think, to take you through the process. Yeah. And so once you kind of get qualified, then do you just get admitted straight away, or what's the process there then?
Essentially, yes, that's right. So there's nothing like having to redo profs or anything like that people do from overseas, from within New Zealand. Yes, you do the exams, you pass those. You do a bit more paperwork, and then you go through the same admission ceremony in the court that all of our law clerks go through here. That I suspect a lot of our listeners are quite familiar with.
Yeah. Now, so you earlier spoke about this whole process of being a lawyer, or not being a lawyer, being able to practice in a law firm in New Zealand while being UK qualified. Can you kind of go through that process? So were you not called a lawyer at Minters or Minter Ellison? Were you?
No, I was called a lawyer. There's a couple of elements to it. One is that there are specific reserved matters that you can only practice as a New Zealand qualified lawyer. That's essentially conveyancing and litigation. Yes. But practicing under New Zealand qualified lawyers and with the right qualifications in place. So, for example, my sign off I was a special counsel at Minters, made it very clear that I was UK qualified, and there are certain other procedural requirements that people have to go through. But otherwise, yes, you can continue to practice as an overseas qualified lawyer in New Zealand. including
Okay.
getting understanding of New Zealand law for that interim period until I'd actually formally requalified.
Yeah, because this is a conversation I had with someone a couple of days ago, how you don't, technically speaking, need to be a lawyer to give legal advice in a lot of work, because it has to be in the reserved area where you appear in court usually, which has to be a lawyer of the High Court of New Zealand, where you have to have that qualification. You can give legal advice in the business world, and you don't have to be, technically speaking, a lawyer. So I think that's something that a lot of people are not aware of or are aware of, but people still want to qualify as a lawyer like you, because there's some differences, and there's certain things you can do being a lawyer, I think.
Absolutely right. And look, people come over to New Zealand for a shorter period of time, not wanting to be here permanently. They don't have to requalify. And in fact, I know some people who've worked here for a number of years, quite a few number of years without requalifying. So that's definitely something that you can do. For me, I felt it was important professionally. I felt it was indicative of the commitment to New Zealand. And to be honest, it upskilled me on a lot of the knowledge that I needed to pick up anyway to be able to work effectively here.
Yeah. So now that's interesting, because you've then gone from being in a law firm and then you've gone into in-house. So this happened twice, actually. It happened in UK.
Yes.
And then it happens in New Zealand. Let's talk about that part. How has that worked? And what's the differences that you've seen in working in a law firm and in-house?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the differences are big. I think I'm gonna be very open and honest here. When I was a fairly young lawyer sitting in my law firm, coming through the system, looking at potentially partnership and beyond, the sort of the linear career path within a law firm, I largely discounted in-house practice.
Yes.
Yes, I'll confess to this. I sort of looked at in-house law as essentially being the off-ramp, as being, well, if you can't make partner, then you go and be an in-house lawyer. And you draft terms and conditions, and that's it. And that was so wrong. really was. And slowly my eyes were opened to that, mostly through the secondments that I did. But firstly with Royal Sun Alliance, but then also this one that I mentioned with the Royal Bank of Scotland. And I really enjoy being at the heart of the organisation, and what I could sort of think of as living with the outcomes. Private practice lawyers do great work and play a very important role, especially on transactional advisory work, whether it's specialist knowledge or providing capacity or being in country, whatever the reasons are that people go to external lawyers. But you give your advice. The client makes the decisions, and then you sign a deal or conclude the matter, and you shake hands and you move on and maybe try and get your bill paid. In an in-house role, you're living with your decisions. You are contributing to the success of the organization you're with. Now, of course, as a lawyer in private practice, you're contributing to the success of your law firm as well. But you live that very differently in-house, and that was what I saw at RBS and loved, and what drove me to take up the role at Barclays. And there's a few things to get used to with that. You have to own your decisions. You live with them in a very different way. It's one thing as an external lawyer to give a piece of advice saying, well, I think you can give up on that warranty here to get the deal done. It's a very different thing when, and that advice is probably good, but it's a different thing when you are living in an organization where something goes wrong and people go to have protection for that, and you go, oh no, we gave up on that warranty and it was a part of risk acceptance, but we now don't have recourse for it. So you live with the consequences of your decisions in a very different way, but you and hopefully in the right organization with the right culture, and that's one of the things I love about Xero. People understand that, and they understand making risk-based decisions, and that sometimes you have what you want or you need and make compromises. But but being at the heart of a business, contributing to its success, making decisions that drive it forward, and then seeing the success that comes from that. So doing M&A for Barclays, doing M&A for Xero, I can see the impact I'm having on that organization I'm working with through effecting its strategy. And I absolutely love that. And that's what really drew me to doing this role in-house, and what I found so rewarding at first Barclays and now at Xero.
Yeah, and I think there's this misconception where I've heard, because I've been in-house majority of my life, and I think one of the things that they talk about is this alternative pathway, they say, which is not the law firm, they call it the alternate pathway. But I don't think so. It's an alternate pathway. Actually, it is a real pathway, just like a law firm. And some people will wish to kind of just go in-house. Also, with that comes, how you're on the partner track. I think when you join in-house, you're on the GC track, you're on a general counsel track, so slightly different. And the decisions you make are quite different. So you might agree with that the a lot of the work sometimes you do is quite similar. It depends on if you're sole counsel or not, because some in-house teams are smaller and they'll just basically do a lot of briefing out, but others will be doing actual work alongside the law firms, and being part of that. It's kind of, the law firm becomes an arm to the in-house team of doing work. So it might be different for you, but I think when I'm at counsel, that's how it works for us, is they become a part of you. But the work that you do and how you do it is slightly different, because, you are part of that team, and the GC and the CEO probably personally. You get to talk to them and the GM. So you get to do that fun stuff.
Absolutely right. I agree with that entirely. And picking up on a couple of things you said there. I mean, firstly, yes, law firms, still play a very important role, and the best ones, work with you to become an extension of your legal team as much as a service provider, and that's really important to me. In terms of bedding down those relationships and making them effective. And from that perspective, the best law firms I work with are the ones who lean into us, understand us, and buy into what we're doing, how we're doing it, our strategy, etc. And see the bigger picture of us as an organization, rather than just providing the ad hoc individual pieces of advice. But I think that working in house is different. I think definitely there's people on the GC path. I think the other thing is that in-house accommodates people who are comfortable at different levels as well, because not everybody wants to be a partner, not everybody wants to be a GC. But law firms are very much up or out organizations. If you're not progressing up the chain, then you will often quickly find yourself surplus to requirements. There are small exceptions to that, but that's essentially the model. Whereas I think that a lot of people who don't want to necessarily scale the loftiest heights can be very comfortable and at home in an in-house environment. But also, I think that the way you work in-house is very, very different, because you're close to your stakeholders. As you say, you're working with the GMs or your CEOs very much, and you develop a very different relationship. You develop a much deeper relationship with your stakeholders. You're not constantly trying to find work and you've got that tap in the back of your head saying, I need to bring in the next piece of work. You embed yourselves in teams that you can really get to know and trust, to understand what's going on, provide advice in context with an understanding that doesn't come elsewhere. And as you rightly say, you can be generalist, especially in the smaller teams where you're expected to do a lot, or you can be very specialist depending on what your preference is. But even as a specialist in-house lawyer, which I've been till quite recently as an M&A lawyer, you still bring something different to the role doing it in-house, and a different understanding of the business, a different understanding of risk. And I think that enables a much more sophisticated calibration of your approach as a lawyer than when you're external and not seeing things from the inside. And, different things appeal to different people, but that's what makes the role tick for me and what I enjoy.
Yeah, and I think I see that quite often in roles. Some people are principals who do not want to manage a team. They're not managers, but they're principals, and they're specialists in their area. In-house, especially, I see this, and so they don't have a team, but they're very specialized technical experts, and that's what their role is. And they'll probably be getting paid as well or as much as a manager would be, but you go to them for their expertise, 20 years of expertise. So that happens quite often. Now, Ben, let's talk about advice. So I've done this the other way around, and instead of talking about your role at Xero and what it entails, we'll bring that to the very end. Let's talk more about any advice you have people who are moving from UK to New Zealand and the other way. So let's first talk about people who are moving from UK to New Zealand. What advice do you have for them?
Absolutely. I think I'd start with a general thought for both directions,
Yes.
which is, I think it's really important for different reasons to understand the market that you're moving into as well as you can. You're never going to understand 100%.
Yes.
There's a lot that the UK and New Zealand shares in common,
Yes.
in terms of shared history of law, very similar cultures, and the like. But they are different places to work, and there are different drivers that come from that. So my first thought is, do your research and understand where you're going to. Don't let that get in the way of making the move if you're excited.
Yes.
But do understand what you're getting into to the extent that you can. I'd say especially moving from New Zealand to the UK, there's a lot of people here who've done that and been there and come back. It's a pretty well-trodden path.
Yes.
But also from the UK to New Zealand, I mean, geez, my range of connections in New Zealand from my time just working at Barclays is enormous. It's amazing how many Kiwis were over there. So seek them out, have a chat, understand what it's like to move. Coming from the UK to New Zealand, I think the first thing to understand is it is a much smaller market.
Yes.
We have a strong and thriving legal community. It's a great legal system to be part of, but the world is very different down here. It's a much smaller set of lawyers and law firms. To understand what it is you're likely to move into, I think that in-house practice can be quite different. The biggest teams here have maybe 30, 40 lawyers at the very biggest end. At Barclays, I think when I joined, we had about 1,000 lawyers globally. So there can be very different kinds of teams, and most teams are less than 10 people in New Zealand. So especially becoming in-house, be realistic about that, understand what that means. It also raises the importance, I think, of being New Zealand qualified to move in-house, because you often find that, whereas in bigger organizations you have some very managerial legal roles, in New Zealand you're a lot more on the tools, but don't let that put you off. You can definitely do the requalification process, and I've seen people move directly into in-house roles. The law firm market is great. It's vibrant, very good firms at all levels, depending on what kind of work you want to do. But again, there are fewer of them. So understand that market and what you're looking for and what you're going to do. And also accept that you'll probably need to be a bit more generous coming from the UK to New Zealand. When I was in the UK, my time, even in my later years at Allen Overy, I was a financial services M&A lawyer. No team in New Zealand is a specialist financial services M&A team. You will do everything. And that's fun. That's exciting. But also understand that that's how it's going to work moving over here. Culturally, again, you'll find a lot of commonalities, a lot of similarities. We share so much in our common heritage, but things are different. Being a smaller market, the way that the deals are done is quite different. You have when I was in the UK, 20 years of doing M&A, I don't think I ever sat across the table from the same law firm partner twice. It's such a big market. Over here, it's all the time. So everybody knows each other, and the way you maintain relationships is very different from that perspective. Doesn't mean you stand up for your client any less, but it does actually mean that things are a bit more collegiate in terms of the way that you get on, which frankly is often a lot more practical for ways of getting deals done.
Yeah, and I think I kind of realized this. When I used to do prosecution work, you'd be prosecuting and then you'll be good friends with the defense lawyer, but when they're there with their client, they kind of don't talk to you much because they want to show to the client that they're doing and being there. But the next day you'll be having drinks with them anyways down the road, and this is how it is, right? And you appear against the same people a number of times, or in deals as well. So it's just,
Yes.
it's a thing. And as you said, in UK, it's quite different because I don't know what the size of the legal fraternity over there is, but I'm pretty sure it'll be bigger than the 15,000 we have in New Zealand. So
Definitely.
yeah,
much bigger. Yes, I don't have the numbers either, but that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. So the drivers and the culture is quite different, but same in some ways, in some respects, because of the size of the market.
Yes.
What about
I would say, sorry, I'd just add on that, of course, a lot of New Zealand practice is driven from the UK because so many people go to the UK, gain experience there, and it is a bigger market, and there's a lot more going on, and then bring that back as a form of best practice. That does mean that commonality and that cultural similarity is much stronger, I think, between the UK and New Zealand than a lot of other countries.
Yeah, and then for the young ones who are wanting to go to UK from New Zealand, this is probably one thing they want to know is work-life balance and hours culture of work. How would you? What's your view about that?
Yeah. So first thing I would caution is that I've been here for 6 years now, and I've been out of private practice in the UK for well over a decade. So my views on this are possibly a little bit outdated, but I would definitely say that work-life balance is tough in the UK. Especially private practice. The work is fabulous. It's exciting. It's big, and especially from London, if you're joining one of the bigger firms, it's really global. People come to law firms in London for the quality of advice, for their expertise, and because English law is a global export. So that means that the interest levels in the work, the thrill, the profile of the work that you could be doing over there is extraordinary. And I love that, as well as being at the heart of what I consider one of the greatest cities in the world, but I'm biased. But the flip side of that is that they are big deals, they're demanding deals. You'll probably find that, at least to begin with, the role that you're playing is probably a little bit less maybe than it might have been in New Zealand, because you have bigger teams on that as you're finding your feet and establishing yourself. And they can often be very, very demanding on the both from a sheer volume of work that needs doing perspective, and also the time zones, depending on where and who you're working with. So be realistic about that. The salaries are fantastic and eye-watering, especially in private practice compared to here, frankly, most places in the world. But there is a I wouldn't call it a cost, but there is a trade-off that you'll need to understand and accept in moving over there.
Yeah. And I've heard stories about 80-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks sometimes, but that comes with some great opportunities and great, what should I say, salaries as well, as you said. So it is different. Now, Ben, without taking too much more time, let's just quickly talk about your role at Xero. We might have spoken about this, what your title is, but can we just go through your title and what do you do at Xero on a day-to-day basis, and how does everything come together?
Absolutely. So my title, which is a bit of a mouthful, is EGM, Executive General Manager in Legal, responsible for strategy, execution, and enablement. Now, what does that mean in practice? As a high-growth tech company, Xero, like most other tech companies, delivers on its strategy through one of three main routes. We either build product ourselves, we partner with people who have great product too to combine the offering, or we buy other businesses where in those sort of exceptional cases we think it's something we want to bring closer to the core and really own. And that enhances the offering that we can give to our customers and improving what they're getting. And so the three legal teams that I look after are the M&A legal team, which does the buying, the global partnerships legal team, which does the partnering, and the product and tech legal team, which supports the build. So we talk about buy, build, partner.
Yeah.
That's really what the three legal teams that I'm helping run efficiently do. What does my role entail then? Well, each of those three teams has fabulous people in it and fabulous leaders. So my job really is to, as I see it, to facilitate what they are doing and make sure they can do what at Xero we describe as doing the best work of our lives. We want to enable them to do the best work of our lives. And our chief growth officer has a great term for this, which I love, which is servant leadership. Yes. So we very much see ourselves in the leadership as enabling the teams below us, as working for the teams that we're responsible for to make sure they can do the best work they can. So part of the work is looking after those teams, clearing blockers for them, helping them to grow and develop. Yes. Part of the work is obviously being an escalation point where needed, formally under our delegation principles for approvals, or informally to make sure that we're being consistent. The role is also about looking across the group and drawing the strands together. And I think that's actually something where legal teams, certainly at Xero, but I think everywhere, are really well placed to do, because typically we're one of the smallest teams with the highest degree of visibility of what's going on. And it's amazing how you can draw strands together across a group where people aren't necessarily making connections, which is a great piece of value add that legal teams can bring over and above the legal side of things. And finally, I'm part of the legal leadership team, which is our chief legal officer, our general counsel, and the four EGMs. And so we're very much responsible for the functioning of the team, the administrative side of things like budgeting, but also we've got a really big focus on well-being, looking after our teams, the holistic approach, and making sure that everything is going smoothly on that front as well.
I see. That's very interesting, and there's a lot going on for you guys, I think, from what I understand at Xero. So congratulations on a promotion. Last I spoke to you, GM. Now you're the EGM. So congratulations on the promotion. And it was good to have you on this call. Thank you for taking out your time to explain to our listeners on your role, how people can move from New Zealand to UK and from UK to New Zealand. So that was really, really good to have you on the call. And let's try and link up once again in the future, once in 2 to 3 years' time, or even in less of a time if things change a little bit.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.